Yeah, so Sami Viitamäki described myself as a strategist in the areas of marketing and customer experience and innovation, because I believe that marketing and innovation are pretty much the only two things that create new value for any organization, because you have to innovate to expand your value potential, then you have to market to get people to do the value exchange with you. Been in big creative agencies for the past 10 years and just took on a role as managing director at Sullivan, which is a smaller agency, and going to help them grow into the future.
Okay, welcome. Everyone, if you could just give a quick round of applause for Sami joining us here. Thank you. So you already introduced yourself in your own words, so I'm going to jump to the second question. So why don't you talk us through how you rose up through the ranks to get to where you are now?
Cool. Rose up to the ranks sounds very fancy. I'd say a little over 10 years ago, I said I'm from Finland, so a little over 10 years ago I was employed at this big telecom operator giant called Telia, which is a pan-Nordic mobile operator. And while I was there, I was also doing some side gigs as a consultant, as a keynote speaker, as a kind of like just an overall digital marketing and especially crowdsourcing guy in the Finnish marketing scene. And that's how TBWA spotted me, and they wanted me to join this new digital unit that they were setting up. And they contacted me, and at first I was like, well, I'm on the business side now, so why would I join the agency side? That doesn't make any sense. But I'm pretty much kind of like creative at the core. I've done design, I've done strategy, I've done both kind of like design on the services side. I've done marketing creative as well. And I was just like, okay, like I gotta take this job. So although I at first said no, I called them back a couple of days later, and I was like, is that post still open? Because I wanna do it. I wanna get there. This was in fall of 2008, which was pretty much the worst time in the recent history to join a creative agency, especially a big one. So we went from, of course, the financial crisis hit. We went from 300 people to 150 in pretty much 3 months. And of course, the original plan for growth for this new digital unit flew out the window. And we went from a growth plan to pretty much a survival mode. Which was a very interesting time in many ways. So a lot of challenges, of course. So we needed to kind of like rationalize and do a lot of things around that, but we never let go of the original ambition, which was to make something of the agency that it wasn't before and turn it into another kind of growth company. And we did a lot of analysis about like what is it that we should be doing in order to kickstart this growth, especially in an environment where in Finland you had marketing budget were pretty much flat.
Okay.
And we came to 3 conclusions. First of all, well, we can't stay in Finland if we want to grow. Second of all, we are part of TBWA, which is a global ad agency network. So we have a lot of global clients who are hungry for especially digital, social, brand innovation work. And then the third realization was that Finland, thanks to Nokia, Angry Birds, and these kinds of things, had a pretty good digital brand. So we were like, okay, maybe we can turn TBWA Helsinki into a global innovation hub for the whole TBWA network. And again, we had like a 6-month plan for this. It took more like 2 years to really get it going. Everything always takes a little more time than planned. But in the end, we were doing a lot of very innovative and cool stuff. We were doing apps for GSK. We were doing smartwatch concepts for Nissan. We were doing Angry Birds games for specifically for McDonald's in China. So it was a lot of very weird, very new, very innovative work that really just pushed the boundaries. And we just got really lucky with the timing of that. And then of course we got to GON top 10 agency in the world in the digital sphere. And that's when, of course, a lot of the key people started getting poached. And of course, people went around the world. I met Sean Lyons, who now heads RGA globally. I met him in Cannes, and it was a weird exchange. I had my pink tank top on, and he was like, "Who is this weird guy from Finland in a tank top talking to me?" But like he asked then, like, what do you think about this whole new marketing digital innovation service space? And I started saying, well, as Kevin Kelly says in his book, What Technology Wants, and he was like, that's my favorite book. And we got along really well. And then after, I think, 15 more interviews, because I was the weird dude from Finland who nobody knew in New York, they finally decided to bring me over to New York, to Havas, New York, where I then spent for the last 4.5 years doing a lot of digital marketing, doing a lot of digital innovation work, and leading that work across many clients such as Hershey, IBM, ADP, TD Ameritrade, and so on. So
Nice.
that's the story so far.
Story so far. You mentioned Kevin Kelly. I'm a big fan as well. Do you want to just quickly explain to the audience who he is?
Oh yeah, so he's the founder of Wired magazine, one of the true original gangsters in the web space. So definitely, if you haven't read What Technology Wants and a lot of other books that he's written, definitely worth it. He writes about how technology is almost its own being. And instead of being a threat to humanity, it's more like an extension of humanity, and very likely also the future form of humanity, like a very, very profound treatise on the humanity, the connection between humanity and technology.
So thanks for giving us all that background. What advice would you have for others with similar aspirations to yourself?
Yeah, I think there are many books around like how to succeed in business and life, but I think a couple of things that have stuck with me through the ages, because I feel that they're very, very relevant to me specifically, coming from the background that I come from, is what Google's Eric Schmidt said as well, is that the two traits that he looks for in people are curiosity and persistence. And I really do believe in that. This day and age, any field and any trait that you go into is so rich and so immense that you have to be pretty curious even to get to the basics of it and get to the heart of it and really kind of like know the trade. I've been in marketing for 15 years. I feel like I'm just getting to the very core of it and to the very essence of it. So kind of like just getting deep down into any trade and being furiously curious about it is one of the things that I would definitely say is critical. The other is relentless persistence. So of course, when you're pushing to get forward and you're pushing to improve your life and improve your work, and especially when you want to advance in any field, and especially when you want to advance any field within an organization or even on the industry at large, I'd say there are a lot of things that are going to be going wrong. There are a lot of things that are not going to go your way. You're not always going to get your way. You're not always going to succeed. But you just have to be very persistent in doing those things that you believe that are worth doing, even when it feels sometimes that like this is why am I even doing this? Like I'm not getting this through. And so, for example, I have this little notebook where I have the things that I believe in. I have the goals that I'm looking for, or the goals that I'm after, and then I have the things that I have to do pretty much every day and every week in order to kind of like go after that and kind of like persist, even in the face of adversity. So that is something that has helped me.
With regards to curiosity, I'm going off track a bit. You'll notice I kind of do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd rather go with the flow. With regards to curiosity, sometimes I find people, I guess, fearful to be curious. Do you see that at all? Or what do you think stops people from being energetically curious?
Yeah, I mean, I see that in myself, for example.
Right.
Like, I'm like, is this worth pursuing? Is this worth going as far as I'm going at this moment? But I think it comes down to, is this something that you're really interested in? Is this something that you're really interested in making your career and making your trade? And if it is, then just go for it, because there are a lot of things that I've found that have no value whatsoever that week or even that month, sometimes even that year. But then suddenly there's an opportunity that opens up, and because you've gone far and because you know your trade very, very well, suddenly that opportunity opens up for you because you had that somewhere in your head.
Nice. Can you name any individual that had a tremendous impact on your career? And maybe it was a positive or a negative impact, but you learned something from it.
Yeah, I could name a few. This is actually funny, and this is pretty obvious since at TBW Helsinki we did a lot of work that required a lot of creativity and required a lot of drive. There were 3 people that I worked a lot with, our creative director, our other strategist, and our CEO. So we did a lot of work on how to innovate the offering, how to serve our clients better in the digital space, how to push into digital experience, not just marketing, and they're all named Sami. So not saying that Finland is homogeneous in any way, but this is actually a very weird fact.
Right.
And 2 of those Samis, apart from me, now live in New York as well. So it's a weird coincidence.
Right.
Here in New York, I would say the one person who has had a very big influence on me is Joe Maglio, who was heading TD Ameritrade at the time at Habas. Taught me a lot about kind of like just intense commitment to people, whether it's your team or your clients. Just a tremendous people person, a very great leader, and also a very open-minded guy. We partnered with him to push the boundaries of what an ad agency can do to a client with this specific client, for example. So,
with regards to the TD Ameritrade guy, sorry, what was his name?
Joe Maglio.
Joe, you said he's a people person. What did that look like to you in that time and experience?
Yeah, I mean, like, especially coming from Finland to New York, they are pretty much night and day when it comes to social culture. I mean, free time is more similar, but the work culture is definitely very, very different. Whether it be within the team or with the clients. So I'd say just kind of like watching how he operates, watching how he handles conflicts, and when to have a conflict and when not to have a conflict. And what are the types of things that American people, for example, in business, like to have conflicts about? And what are the things that they don't absolutely want to have conflicts about? That was a big learning for me, because like in Finland, those things are totally different.
Right. Do you think it's was just the Finnish versus American thing, or do you think it was an age thing as well? Like as in
age thing, meaning
as in you getting older, because when you're in Finland you're younger, here you're more experienced.
Yeah, I mean, might have to do a little bit with that, but I would say it is definitely a factor in social culture, just like how people behave and are expected to behave at work versus free time. In America versus Finland, it's very, very different.
What's one of the things that you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your career?
That's a good question. I'd say one of the things that I've come to realize in the past few years, I think, is, and I've read about this too, is that rather than trying to find your passion, you should just, especially when you're young and when you're early in your career, you should just try to find a job that helps you develop and get really good at it, no matter what that job almost is. There's a lot of people who are kind of like bouncing around, and I used to do this a lot when I was younger. We're bouncing around, trying to find kind of like the passion, but it's not necessarily about that. It's more about how do you get to a job that develops you, that helps you develop certain skills that are then applicable broadly in pretty much any setting, and just kind of like focusing on that is very, very valuable. And kind of like maybe after getting really good at something, you get those opportunities, and then kind of like when that opportunity to grab your passion finally comes, you are actually very, very skilled and developed in a lot of different things that you can then use to pursue your passion. So
it's just almost like a launch pad, right? Establish a launch pad.
Yeah, exactly.
A confidence launch pad.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's this culture where there's a lot of like influencers, for example, telling us like just kind of like make your hobby your day job, and it works for some people, but for most people it might be really bad advice.
Yeah.
So you open up a yoga studio, you don't have any idea about like segmenting your audiences or like how location matters and all these kinds of things.
Did you do a yoga studio?
I unfortunately didn't yet, but I will at some point. But I have to build some skills before I do.
Right. Well, you're doing meditation, so.
Yeah.
Technology predictions, 2 to 3 years from today, what would you predict, or what do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, so there's of course a lot of predictions around how many Amazon Echoes are going to be in how many U.S. households and how many of them are going to be. I'm not going to do any of those predictions, but I'm going to give you 4 lenses that I use to kind of like track what's happening and how do I weave them into kind of like these bigger wholes. First is how digital architecture is changing. So nowadays you have cloud that basically makes AI, big data operations available for anybody. And then on the other hand, you have microservices and APIs that you can use to build like very modular, very dedicated services for whichever purpose. And I think just the dynamics between these two technologies and everything in between is very, very interesting. Walgreens, for example, just launched their new loyalty program, which is basically a set of APIs that you can join. So for example, if you're a fitness app, you can track your users' steps or exercise or other activity, and you can reward them with Walgreens products. And this is like an open API that, I mean, you have to get qualified, but after that you can use the APIs pretty flexibly. So that's really interesting what you can do there. The other is the physical internet, so it's not just the internet of things. I'd say it's the internet of thinking, moving, acting, seeing, doing all kinds of things. It's almost as if the internet is growing a physical form, and it's super interesting how kind of like that manifests itself and how it's almost like the digital world reaching into the physical world and becoming flesh almost. And there are a lot of interesting things happening now in that space where physical and digital are almost blending. So you have the Nike store in Melrose, on Melrose in LA, where it almost acts like an online store, but it's a physical location and it's built to the preferences of the people around it. Same thing with Hema stores, which are Alibaba's grocery stores in China. They're like Whole Foods taken to another level with face recognition, with how they track their customers' preferences and shopping behaviors. So that kind of like melding of the physical and digital is super interesting. Then of course you have how meaningful engagement shifts and how you still need to focus on certain very, very key core human benefits. So you don't just do technology for technology's sake, but how you always focus on delivering. You're doing something for a purpose. So for example, these all the technologies from smart speakers to VR technologies are there, but then how you use them and how you crack problems, also, for example, internally in your organization with these technologies, it's interesting. One example is not Walgreens, but Walmart, who are using VR technology to train their people for Black Friday because they've noticed that it's such a critical event for them to get right that they are actually training people with VR to handle the chaos. So just a very, very interesting use of technology. And then last but not least, the digital tension around security, around privacy, around even knowing what's real anymore. We all know the AI fake faces that have never existed. Also, like nowadays, you can take a video, you can make a transcript out of it.
But this is real, right? The Fireside.
This is almost real.
Yeah.
This is shot for real.
Right.
I don't think this is computer generated, but I might be completely wrong.
We could all be completely wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's interesting when you can take a video of somebody speaking and you can extract the transcript, and then you can edit that transcript as you would edit a Word document.
Tyler,
and the video.
Don't get any ideas about what he's saying.
Yeah, and you can edit.
Who knows? You and I will not appear in this video. Post this video.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like when you can't trust a video anymore, then what can you trust? So, for example, the 2020 elections are going to be very interesting. But
then there's the question: could we ever trust?
Can we even trust our own eyes and ears?
Right.
I mean, there's this age-old philosophical question of the brain in a vat. That is
brain in a vat.
Brain in a vat. So we might be all just brains in a vat that are kind of like teased by some demons.
Right.
Like this is kind of like way back, like centuries ago. So
who knows?
I mean, you never know. You
never know. We might wake up tomorrow and find we're all in the Matrix.
Yeah.
I believe that. Oh, Bruno's telling me 5. Okay, we've got one more question. Which one? Well, I'm going to choose this. So you've worked in Europe and the US, or Finland and the US. How do the two compare from a technology perspective, and where do you see these differences manifest?
Yeah, a few different places. First, I think, is the excitement and enthusiasm about everything new, which doesn't necessarily happen in Europe, but I think in the US people are very excited about innovation overall. The more new it is, the better it is in many instances. So that, I think, is a very positive thing, having experienced that in America. I think the other thing is just the readiness to deploy technologies at scale. US is a big home market, whereas Europe is like tens of different countries with their own languages, with their own regulations. With their own sensitivities, with their own regulations to an extent. You have the EU, but you still have like many countries doing whatever they like. And I think then there is I think in Europe, people stand up for individual rights versus corporate kind of like power differently. I mean, you go to Paris and they riot about everything pretty much every week. But I think like that individual freedom and individual rights against corporate power are taken more seriously in Europe. And then you have things like the GDPR, which also affects the US. Funny fact is actually that when you look at companies' GDPR readiness, because of this trouble of deploying at scale in Europe, you actually have the bigger share of companies in the US being GDPR ready than in Europe. So it's almost backwards.
Yeah.
Because they invented it, but because it's easier to deploy solutions at scale in the US, the US companies are actually ready for it, whereas European companies are still struggling.
Thanks, Sami. So we're going to open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, that's a very, very astute actually. Yeah, I did some Coursera courses around data analytics just for fun because I felt that my work was too amorphous at the time. So I had to ground myself again in kind of like some very hard business data analytics. I think writing for sure has been the more beneficial one because you can always learn a lot of stuff, but if you don't actively process it and if you don't integrate it into your own thinking and how you perceive them and how you will use them in the future, and if you don't kind of like create your own integrated framework and your own integrated mindset about these things, then it's going to be hard to use them. And writing is actually really good for organizing the world around you. So you've learned a lot, but then so what? And then when you're writing, you can actually make sense of it and you can have your own lens into it. So I'd say writing for sure. There's a book called Working with Americans that I urge you to read. It has a lot of very golden information about just these tiny, just for example, like the American relationship with space. Because like it's a vast country, there are a lot of open spaces, and how American people deal with space and how they relate to it and why they think size is important. Like those are the tiny things that you'd never come across in your everyday working life, but it's good to know kind of like what lies beneath. Like why are people different? Why do they relate to things as they do? So Working with Americans, pick it up. It has a lot of the answers.
It's not like an encyclopedia.
It's not too long. It's actually a fairly nice, quick read, and they have a lot of good summaries too, and a lot of good quotes. Yeah, damn, that's a big question.
There's two left. I figured take them both.
Yeah. I mean, like, I always look at it as kind of like when you look at the long arc of development and how technology makes things possible, both good and bad. I always just kind of like have this trust that like it's gonna go well in the end and it's gonna get better in the end because it's always done so. This might be completely misguided. And I share your worry about like, especially with machine learning, kind of like you have a lot of people saying, like, for example, you have a lot of people saying that US and China are pretty much the only countries that had the scale to develop world-leading AIs. And what that means, basically, like there's this book by Kai-Fu Lee called The AI Superpowers. Really good read, but like in that he makes the claim that like US and China are pretty much the only countries that even have the possibility to create these dominating AIs, and then the rest of the world will just be a market for them, which is kind of like a fairly dystopian view. And I think like it's something that like needs to be acknowledged and needs to be addressed, and especially it needs to be addressed in the European countries and African countries and Latin American countries. Like, what are the investments that they need to make to things such as machine learning so that they can hold their own and they can actually build businesses and build organizations that are able to kind of like serve their own markets. So I think, yeah, that's a really big question. And I think you just gotta stay active. You gotta kind of like support the things, kind of commercially support the things that you think are doing the right thing, because it's about companies too. Like, you can have a certain amount of regulation, but then it's really about also supporting those companies that you think are doing things that are good for the planet and good for the society. And like, I mean, people always come to Patagonia, but I really believe that like we can still make choices. It's not just Amazon, at least not yet. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a few years ago, we were seeing these brand ideas that were all about flying drones that are 3D printing, like smart speakers that are gonna sing your brand jingle, and they're gonna fly to people's homes, and that doesn't make any sense. So of course we got, and this is again the thing, I think like there was a period where everything was okay, everything goes, and everybody was doing a lot of different weird things that didn't have anything to do with building a brand or building a marketing success or pretty much anything else than just experimenting and throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. And I think marketers were also like ready to experiment on anything because they were like, we gotta be in on this, otherwise we'll fall behind. And now I think for the past few years, we've gone back to a place where like people are a little more sensible about things. People have also, again, realized that like, yeah, if you want to build a brand, then TV is probably a really good vehicle for that because it is very powerful in, especially in building the types of emotional connections that you need to make if you want to build a big household brand. So I think the past few years we've been better at that. There was a period where things were crazy and it was all about technology and very much less about the brand. But I think also, like, this is again a thing, I think also that was necessary. Like, for example, you have a band and then you have one of the guys breaks into a solo career, makes a couple of horrible, crappy records, and then he comes back into the band and they're great again. Like you gotta have that period of experimentation because otherwise you're not gonna get forward from where you were. And I think there were a lot of learnings in the digital space that are now then integrated into the marketing thinking as well. So there's a couple of components to it. One, Finland has a very good education system, like probably best in the world. I think Singapore passed us, damn it. But we're still in the top 3. So the level of education in Finland is very high. On the other hand, Finland doesn't emphasize education from a very early age at all costs. So there is this culture of play and letting kids just hang and do whatever they want to do, whether it's mayhem or something constructive. And so there is this kind of like culture of free play, so you can actually explore things and you can become what you want to become. So those are good things. And then kind of like what I think is holding Finnish people back many times when it comes to innovation is that Finnish people are crazy insecure on average about their own capability and their like the worth of the thing that they're making. So they want to have it perfect. They want to have it absolutely perfect before it's ever launched, before it ever sees the light of day. And I think that's something that sometimes holds Finnish companies back. And I mean, like they're getting better. Like the startup movement in Finland is crazy. I think they have the biggest startup festival in the world at the moment, Slush. So definitely like things are changing, and for example the lean startup and agile processing and testing things is a completely different thing now in Finland than it was like, let's say 10 years ago. But I think this kind of like engineering to perfection mindset is something that has held Finnish people back, whereas like you come to America and people are like, we don't even have this thing done yet, but we're gonna put it to market because we want to start making money. So that I think like both have their healthy sides and like both have their pros and cons, and I think you need to find like the balance in between.
I'm going to borrow yours.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're about to be doing business with Finland, so this is really helpful.
Yeah.
Everyone, just round of applause for Sami.
Thank you, guys.